Welcome to the Love Deep Lab podcast, helping you integrate sex, sexiness, sacredness, and science in your life and your bedroom. And now, your host, Dr. Stormy.
Hi, I'm Dr. Stormy. Thanks for joining us today on the Love Deep Lab podcast. Today we are going to talk about something that is so common that some might say pretty universal, actually, but we're going to talk about anxiety. And right now in the state of our world and sort of this emergence from COVID, anxiety even has it's a different texture and a different caliber than maybe we've ever seen before. So today I have an amazing expert guest with us. And anxiety is his jam. It is his passion to help people integrate and grow and with, alongside of, and from their anxiety. We're also going to talk about how sex is impacted by anxiety and how anxiety impacts sex, right? You hear me say all the time, what happens in the bedroom shows up in life, and what happens in life shows up in the bedroom. So today we are going to just dive into anxiety, and I'm so excited to have you all here today with us. So let me introduce our guest. Dr. Russell Kennedy, aka the Anxiety MD, specializes in the art and neuroscience of helping people recover from anxiety disorders. He knows anxiety from the inside out as he developed his own anxiety disorder as a result of growing up with a dad with severe schizophrenia. Dr. Kennedy has degrees in advanced training in medicine, neuroscience, and developmental psychology. But it's not all science, as he is also a certified yoga and meditation teacher and was a professional stand-up comedian for over a decade. No joke. In his award-winning book and audiobook, Anxiety RX, he shows a practical, actionable program for anxiety relief that incorporates a combination of the latest in neuroscience with the grounding and wisdom of the body. So welcome, Dr. Kennedy.
Hey,
So happy to have
thanks,
you.
Stormy. It's great to be here.
Amazing. And you're coming to us from British Columbia, you said,
Victoria,
right?
British Columbia, Canada. Yep.
Okay. Amazing. Just across
Canada.
the pond. Amazing. Awesome. So I'd love to just hear, you shared a little bit in your bio, but for you, like how this became, your passion. This is what you love to help people with. This is what you are in practice with yourself. So just, why anxiety of all the things that you could choose to work with your many degrees and background?
Well, because I had anxiety. I grew up with a dad, like it said in my bio, who had schizophrenia. And from the time I was about 10, I was paranoid that I was going to show up, get the same disease as my father because it was so devastating for him and for the whole family, So, yeah, over the course of, 10, 11, 12, I started seeing my dad kind of, falter or lose contact with reality. 14, 15, 16, I started to get a real handle on exactly what was happening with him. And eventually he died from suicide when I was 26. So it was one of those things where he just had this slow decline. And my anxiety really started by being just really fearful that I was going to show up with the same schizophrenia that he did. So I didn't wind up getting schizophrenia, but I certainly worked myself into an anxiety disorder. And then, so partly what my passion is to help other people not have to suffer with anxiety the way I did. That's my main thing. But the other thing is really just as an homage to my dad, like how much suffering he went through and how much suffering my family went through and how much suffering I went through with him. And just making that mean something, making that suffering actually turn into meaning, much like you've done with your son. And this pain that we have, this sort of these wounded healers, we're kind of the best at it because we've been there. We've been in the trenches. We've been there. So we know what it feels like and we know what it's like to find your way out.
Yeah, so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And you said, one of the things that you talk about a lot in your content is healing anxiety kind of from the body and in the body. And that's our kind of portal into our healing. And so tell me a little bit about that, like how that came to be for you, how you studied that.
Well, after 30 years of frickin' talk therapy that didn't do a damn thing for my own anxiety, I had to because here's what happened. So February of 2013, I'm working at an urgent care clinic, burned out of medicine, like just burned right out. But at night, what kept me going is doing stand-up. So I do stand-up probably 5 out of the 7 nights a week if I wasn't on tour. So it was one of those things where, I was just completely burned out of medicine. I ruptured my left Achilles tendon fully, so I needed a full surgical repair. And I was like, I'm out. Like, there's just, I can't do this medicine thing anymore. So I collapsed at that point. And then, I was doing all this, medication and psychotherapy and all, and it wasn't really helping. So
Yeah.
a friend of mine said, look, I'm going to take you on a psychedelic journey. So he took me through LSD, and I'm going to make this very short, but on LSD, I saw that what I considered was my anxiety, and this is coming from a guy who's got a degree in medicine and neuroscience, wasn't in my brain at all. It was actually in my body, right?
Holy
Yeah,
shit.
exactly. So what the fuck am I going to do with this? Right? Says the doctor. Right? So
Uh-huh.
I find, this LSD shows me that my anxiety is actually this state of alarm that's stuck in my solar
Mm,
plexus, and it's only
mm,
being read by my mind. My mind is only
mm,
making sense of this alarm that's been stuck in me
mhm.
from my trauma of dealing with my dad who had schizophrenia, which was stuck in my body. And then once I
Yeah.
started really seeing that energy was actually my younger self asking for attention,
Mm,
and it was asking for attention by making me really uncomfortable. Once I started
mm,
coming alongside that and started looking at the alarm, what I call alarm in the body, because I don't even really like the term anxiety. I much prefer the term alarm. It makes more sense from a consciousness standpoint. And it really is a state of alarm. So why
mhm.
aren't we dealing with this state of alarm in our body, which is the fundamental root cause of anxiety? And we're just chasing our tails trying to fix the thoughts, because you'll never fix the thoughts. Like, the thoughts are always, you're always going to have crazy thoughts, right? Like, it's always going to come, like your brain. And I was reading this research the other day on split brain patients, right? Like patients who have
Mhm,
epilepsy. So they split the
mhm,
corpus callosum, the fibers that join the left and right hemisphere. And I'll shorten this up as well. But what they would do is they'd find a way of presenting only to the right hemisphere. So if you present only
mm,
to the left visual field, it will only go into the right hemisphere. But the left hemisphere
mhm,
won't have any clue of what's going on. But the left hemisphere has to compulsively come up with a reason as to why
mhm.
you're feeling this way. And that reason may
Wow.
not even be accurate. So basically, to make a long story short, anxiety is really this
Huh.
state of alarm in the body. It gets fed up through the insula, through the right insula, mostly in the right hemisphere, and the left hemisphere's got to do something with it. It's got to do so. It makes up a reason, it makes up a worry, it makes up a fear that makes sense of this
Mhm.
thing, and then you believe that fear because you fricking made it up, and then it just makes the
Yeah.
alarm worse in your body, which makes the thoughts
Mm,
worse, which makes the alarm worse, and you get in this alarm anxiety loop that you can't get out of. And not only can't you get out of
mm.
it, it just gets worse and worse and worse as you get older.
Absolutely amazing. So I love that. I don't know when you said that when we were checking in before we were recording. I love the state of alarm in my body because even when you say that, when I think about anxious times for me, I had some this morning. It was just one of those
Sure.
mornings, a little bit of a teenage challenging navigation. I can really actually feel it in my
Yeah.
body. Like even saying it, it's like I can feel it in my body. So you mentioned your state of alarm, identifying it really in your solar plexus. Do you find that where we can most identify the state of alarm varies from person to person?
Yeah, I do. But, so here's a little story about that and dealing with kind of thousands of people that have anxiety. And what I will do, one of the first things I'll do is I'll say, okay, where do you feel this anxiety, what you call anxiety, in your body? And a lot of them don't even recognize, a lot of people don't even recognize that this state of alarm is in their body. They think it's in their mind.
Hmm.
So I'll say,
Totally.
okay, let's just, take you through a trauma, not the worst trauma of your life, but let's go into a trauma. Say you had you were speaking in front of your class when you were 12 years old and you got really embarrassed. Close your eyes, ground your feet on the floor. Where do you feel that in your body? Like, scan your body from your chin
Mm,
to your pubic bone and the midline and see if you find something. A lot of people will find it in their belly or their solar plexus or their heart area or their throat. A
mm,
lot of
mhm,
women who had issues with their mothers will feel this alarm in their throat because they were never allowed to express what they really
mm,
wanted to say.
mm,
So I'll find their
mhm.
alarm in their throat. And once we find that alarm, then we can focus on that from a somatic perspective and then
Right.
open that up, and often we'll find memories behind that, we'll find all sorts of things.
Mm.
But people are just amazed. It's like, I've had anxiety for like 35 years and I've never actually thought to look for it in my body. And then I say, well, that's probably why you haven't healed in 35 years and you're coming to see me because you've tried everyone else and I'm like the last resort.
Oh, that's so. I love that. Right, and the body never
Nope,
lies.
that's
Right,
right.
our mind, my mind lies all the fucking
Yeah.
time, but my body. if I'm quiet and I am in practice to listen to it, it never lies. And I think there's such wisdom in the body. And obviously in my world, and this is like a great segue into like sex and sexuality, pleasure lies in the
Yeah.
body. Really deep, beautiful orgasm lies in the body, even though there's processes that happen in our brain, although we really don't know all that much about orgasm, as you know, from a neuroscience perspective. But it's really about being in the body. So do you find it in your vast experience of working with yourself and also with your patients and your clients that that state of alarm causes us to mistrust or not feel safety in our body?
Yeah. Yeah. I find a lot of people with anxiety will develop, when it comes to sexuality, which is kind of like your forte, I find that people won't be their real authentic selves because typically the anxiety or alarm for them started because of a mistrust of a parent or something that happened to them when they were a child. So what happens is, and what happened with me was that I couldn't trust my dad, even though I loved my dad a great deal. And he was a wonderful father in many ways. When he was sane, he was amazing. But there was this sense that I got, this unconscious or non-conscious, whatever you want to call it, sense that it wasn't safe to love, right? So many people with anxiety have this sense that it's not safe to love. And because we equate love with sex so much, then sex isn't safe either. So what I find is people develop this kind of sex persona that they develop so that they can almost have false intimacy with someone else. And it's not really, they're not really having sex from their true core. They're having sex from their wound. Right.
Amazing.
And then,
Yeah,
and so their partners, you can tell when someone isn't, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, you can tell when someone isn't quite coming from their core, and they don't come from their core because they don't trust that sense of love, because that sense of love for them when they were younger was a source of pain as well.
Yeah, I love that, because it's one of the things that I love to teach and practice myself is really like embodied sex, really presence-based sex, like what you're talking about, really feeling, right? But I have to be able to feel safe in my own body, but also in my own psyche, right? And I love that what you said about trying on a person, not trying on, but actually like making love and having sex from a persona, an anxiety persona, right? And you also mentioned inner child and how inner child, I love that, how inner child plays into anxiety. One of my favorite tools is how does inner child play into sex, because it does, right? And so it's so connected. It's so, linked. I mean, sex and anxiety, as we're talking, I'm even realizing so many more connections than I had, first thought of, is that, one of the areas where I think anxiety shows up in spades is in sex, right? In performance and in, like you said, in the persona, and trying to read if you're having partner sex, read your partner. And, and one of the things I always say is that two people come together and they want to have fabulous, mind blowing, time bending sex, and they don't ever want to talk about it. It's like, that's just ridiculous, So how do you, piece together anxiety showing up in the bedroom, anxiety showing up maybe in self-pleasure or partnered sex?
Yeah, it's really curious, because I see a lot of both men. Typically, what I see in men is they went to porn very early. If they had trouble in their family, if there was a, alcoholic parent or an ill parent or an addicted parent or whatever, men tend to go to porn, and women tended to go to promiscuity. Not all of them, but a lot of, because it's a way of, that release, that orgasm, that feeling of connected, closeness to a partner, or just orgasm itself is really addictive. So it becomes this sort of it becomes a means to an end rather than an end. Oh, maybe I'm not saying that right. It becomes sort of a coping mechanism. Right.
Totally.
So it gets ingrained. And I think that's why porn gets so ingrained in men, is because especially, and I've talked to a lot in my men's groups a lot about this, is that if you used porn as a way of soothing yourself when you were 12, 13, 14 years old, sex is going to have this kind of connotation to you that it's a coping strategy as opposed to a form of connection. And the reason why you adopted the coping strategy in the first place is because you didn't feel frickin' connected in your own house. So you've got this dichotomy going on there where you're using it to be connected, but it's also something you used when you felt disconnected. Right? So yeah. So exactly.
Yeah. So like a conduit to connection, but then you also said a conduit to orgasm, right? And so, I think that's maybe why, just musing, brainstorming here, right? I think that maybe why one of the reasons why we are so incredibly orgasm focused, right? Western sex tends to be incredibly
Yep.
orgasm focused, and we know porn is very orgasm / ejaculation focused, right? And often the connection lies way earlier than the orgasm or
Totally.
ejaculation, and not earlier. It starts earlier and hopefully persists throughout. But I love that as in a means to connection while also being incredibly
Yes.
disconnected. And porn by itself, like I work a lot with my couples about porn. I get asked a lot about porn, and I'm like, let's look at it from a neuroscience perspective, how it impacts particularly the teenage male brain, and literally lights up like heroin in certain ways. And then let's also look at the fact, does it bring you deeper into connection, or does it separate you from connection, from your partner, from your own pleasure, from your own orgasm? And getting curious about that. No judgment, screw judgment, but getting curious about that. It's also voyeuristic by design, right? So there is a disconnection in the voyeurism.
Yeah.
And voyeurism is one of the most common kinks. It's super hot, right? For many people. So
yeah.
That's interesting.
And because men are so visually oriented, boys are so visually oriented, most of the Viagra prescriptions I used to write in practice were for men in their 20s and 30s, right? Because, they had edged themselves so much to porn that when they actually got with a real woman, the pressure was immense. So often they would use a little bit of Viagra or Cialis or whatever to, the first few encounters, so they'd feel that confidence, so they could actually go through it. So yeah, most of the prescriptions I wrote for Viagra and Cialis were for men in their 20s and 30s, not for men in their 60s and 70s, right?
Right, that's so. I mean, right, and then we're back to performance, right?
Totally.
Performance is the opposite of sexy and embodied, right? The performance is the opposite of deep connection, right? And so absolutely, that is really interesting about them.
Another really interesting thing that I see with women is just the tremendous amount of guilt that women who struggle with anxiety suffer because they started having sex very, very young, 12, 13, 14 years old. They started having, because and I would get them to look back. It's like, well, look, what sources of connection did you have in your household or in your life at that particular point in time? And they didn't. Right. So this was a way of actually feeling connected, but they have tremendous amounts of guilt over that, which of course gets carried into their, their sexual persona as they get older and as they form relationships and that kind of thing too. So there's a lot of stuff in there that really, sex is one of the, as Dr. Gordon Neufeld, my developmental psychologist mentor, says, sex is human superglue. We get oxytocin, we get endocannabinoids, we get, endogenous opioids from the periaqueductal gray. There's all sorts of places in the brain where we get this connection. And, we go a little crazy when we first get in with the new partner for the first 6 to 12 weeks, because oxytocin is really high. The endogenous opiates are really high. We're a little nuts, And then what happens is, as those chemicals come down, which they naturally have to, as oxytocin and opioids and that kind of stuff come back down again, then we revert back into our old, attachment styles. So, an avoidant attachment and a disorganized attachment, when they get together for the first 12 weeks, they can be amazing because they've got so many chemicals in their system. That old defensive mechanism of staying apart is overridden. But as those chemicals come down, the old resistance to becoming connected will show back up again. And that's why most relationships break up after, 6 to 12 weeks.
Yeah, totally. Right. And that's, so, I get asked a lot, this just pops in as a question I'd love to pick your brain on. So I get asked a lot when I work with, my heart is really with coupleship. I work with a lot of singles as well, but I really believe our relationships are a deep crucible for our growth and transformation. Mine is for sure. And I said parenting and partnership, those are my two greatest. But, often people say, well, it's impossible to have passion or connection after, 6 to 12 months, right? That's what a lot of research says. So just from a neuroscience and from looking through a lens of anxiety and, bringing in obviously the, opioids and oxytocin and, and endorphins and all the things that, what do you think from that perspective on maintaining passion in a long-term partnership?
Well, here's the thing. This is where I get a little bit kind of nerdy into neuroscience too. Like the amygdala is commonly referred to as the fear center of the brain, which isn't actually accurate. What the amygdala really fires up with and makes us more emotional about is novelty. So anything new, which of course, if you look at from an evolutionary perspective, if you're in the savannah and you see something new, it's like, well, that's likely it's going to be dangerous, right? So,
Right.
so
Alert,
yeah,
alert,
exactly.
alert.
So that amygdala gets fired up, but it's also the amygdala that, kind of fires in. If you look at the sexual, the way the sexual circuits, not that there are sexual circuits, but the parts of our brain that really kind of light up. Like the amygdala, novelty is a huge one, right? That's why men go for porn, and there's you can see 1,000 different naked women in 45 seconds or whatever it is. That's an exaggeration, but you know what I mean? So the amygdala plays a big role in that. Now, if your amygdala is firing off on a regular basis with anxiety, how are you gonna sort of say, okay, well, this is good amygdala work, and this is bad amygdala transmission? You can't. So it's a matter of, the way you do it is you become aware. It's like, okay, I realize that novelty is one of the things that will keep me, especially for females, because males can be, stimulated visually, and 70% of our brain is devoted to the visual system. So males have it kind of, it's no wonder we're more typically heralded as more sexual than females, because 70% of our brain is visual. So we're kind of in that thing. Whereas with females, if you look at the amygdala, novelty is huge with that. So if you can start getting novelty in there, but the thing about novelty and the amygdala is when the amygdala fires up, typically people with anxiety think that that's not safe. So you need safety as well. Those are my dogs. They need safety as well, who are warning of something, some danger that's come up. So you need
package delivery.
So you need novelty as well in that amygdala as well. So there's all these different circuits that get involved, and it's like, how can we lean on, what's innate, what's hardwired in us, and use it for our good, as opposed to using it for something that's going to make us worse.
That's so awesome. So amazing. You would love, if you don't know Wednesday Martin's work, her book called Untrue. It totally goes into the evolutionary neuroscience and neurobiology of, again, the male brain being more visual and women. But one thing that made me think of it, she was talking about the amygdala, right? And our desire for novelty, that women actually we're scanning. So we're interested in novelty, men with the visual. And so it's really to your point, let's stop looking at well, this just being a guy or just being a girl, and let's start looking at the science of pleasure and how do we work. The science of pleasure and the science of anxiety are incredibly overlapping, and that's pretty amazing. I love the intersection of sex, science, and sacredness. Those are the three pillars of our podcast. So on that note, we do sexy homework every week with our listeners. So Dr. Kenny, what would be some practices that our listeners could start to maybe put a toe in or a foot in to work with their anxiety in this more somatic, more resourcing way?
One of the things that I really like using for people is getting a hot water bottle, and first thing in the morning and last thing before bed for 5 minutes, just putting it over your adrenals. So your adrenals are kidneys, are glands that are above your kidneys. So basically your kidneys are kind of in the middle of your back there. So you can do a search to find out where your adrenals are and that kind of thing. And then just heat the hot water bottle up to something that's warm. Don't get it too hot. And then put it on your bed and then lie over your adrenals where the hot water bottle is pushing up on that. Because it basically tells your adrenal glands, which secrete adrenaline and cortisol, actually, as well, the adrenal medulla. The adrenal medulla secretes. I shouldn't have had coffee today before I can. So yeah, the adrenal cortex has cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and epinephrine, also called adrenaline. So basically, the adrenals in those of us who are anxious never really knows that it can relax. So if you can put, 5 minutes of warm sort of water with a hot water bottle on your adrenals, it just tells your adrenals, it's like, okay, you can just stop for a while. You can relax for a
I love
while. Because
that.
it's like,
I can like almost feel
yeah,
it.
it's like that
It's like,
professor, when he says he holds up a mug of water, says like, how long can I hold this mug of water? It's like on YouTube or whatever. If I hold it up here for half an hour, my arm is going to start to ache. If I hold it up here for 4 hours, it's really going to start hurting. And if I hold it up for a whole day, my arm's going to feel like it's falling off. But if you put it down every 10 or 15 minutes, you have a chance of resting. So just resting those adrenals is really, really important just to get that felt sense of safety in your body. Because everything comes from a sense of safety. If you don't have a sense of safety, as you opened up today when we were talking, nothing matters at that point. If you don't feel safe, nothing matters.
no. Totally. And again, it's such an overlap. Safety is so important for working with anxiety, and safety is so important for having great
Yeah.
sex, right? It's really like, it's another really big overlap. I love that. I'm totally getting my water bottle out tonight, my heating bottle out tonight. That sounds so nourishing. It really, really does. So what would be another practice that you have that you like to, that you can
Well,
share?
breath, there's something called the physiological sigh, right? And Dr. Andrew Huberman talks a lot about this in his podcast on neuroscience, which is basically 2 quick breaths in through your nose and 1 slow breath out through your mouth. Now, I notice with people with anxiety that they will start breathing very shallowly, right? So their chest wall starts to constrict. And when your chest wall starts to constrict like that, it sends a message up to your brainstem that there's danger. And as soon as the message that there's danger goes up to the brain, as we mentioned earlier, the left hemisphere has got to do something with that. So even though there's no threat in your immediate environment, the left brain goes, what can I worry about? Right? It's like, and there's always a million things you can worry about.
Yep.
So it is one of those things that we just have to, if you can start understanding how your respiratory system works and how the breath is really the only conscious connection to the autonomic nervous system, your automatic nervous system. So I get people to do 3 quick breaths in through their nose, expand their chest as much as they can at the top, hold it for about 5 seconds, and then breathe out through pursed lips. And when you breathe out through pursed lips and you create a little bit of resistance there, it supercharges the effect. And if you really want to go nuts on the effect, it's like do 3 breaths in, hold it for 5, and then do a chant like, oh. And if you do about 5 rounds of that, your body, like I do this all the time, so I'm going to go into a little bit of a dissociative relaxation state if I'm not careful here. So, but it really works. It really works.
Oh my gosh, it's
You're
amazing.
hacking your own autonomic nervous system to relax you as opposed to making it worse. And I remember doing Byron Katie's School for the Work about, it was in March of 2015. And she said something that's always stuck with me. And she says, when you're anxious, the anxiety is breathing you. You're not breathing for yourself anymore. So you have to sort of take control over your own breath. And when you start taking control of your breath, even if you hold it for a few seconds, you're telling your brain, I'm in control of this. You're not, the anxiety isn't, you're not the boss of me, anxiety.
That's amazing. I love that. And I love that. I mean, that's a really, we do a lot of polyvagal work in when I work in mental health and substance use disorder. And, I love the idea of, they talk about our breath as a marker of where we are in our autonomic nervous system. And I love that, right? Most of the time we breathe fairly unconsciously and really crappy, right? So that it's such a powerful anchor to presence and to our body, right? So that's an amazing one. I do a lot of breath with my clients in pleasure, right? Because we tend to breathe shallow and fast and constricted and not use our diaphragm as we move towards deeper pleasure, which actually takes us out of pleasure. So there's, it's again, another massive overlap. We could go on and on for sure. So we also, when we have the privilege of having an expert guest, we do a speed run. So are you ready? Okay. So our 3 pillars are sex, science, sacredness. So a little intimacy, getting to know each other. So for you, Russell, what is what feels like, what like lights you up, what makes you feel really like sexy and powerful, right? So how do you right now most deeply connect to feeling sexy in your life?
I think for me, a lot of it was when I did stand up, because I really felt like I was in control. I was never a big fan of improv because I always, when you're improv, there's always two or three other people up there struggling with you. And the sexy part for me was just really relying on myself and just being the only
Mm.
one out there having the microphone, knowing I had sort of 45 minutes to fill. And it was
Wow.
really exciting. It would really charge me up. Like I love speaking in front of people and making them laugh. That was a big
Amazing.
one.
I can see it through this
Oh, I love
recording. You
it.
just like
Yeah.
light
No,
up.
I
Yeah,
really,
that's
I
amazing.
really, really enjoy like speaking to people and entertaining them and mostly making them laugh.
That's amazing. Isn't it funny what someone's sexy is? Because to me, that literally sounds fucking
Yeah.
terrifying. Like,
Well, it was
it's like,
initially. It was initially, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. But
amazing.
once you get fairly good at it, then you really start looking forward to it. And the worst part of stand up is the travel and just the downtime and the bad food and the bad hotels. And I remember, I'm not going to tell the story too long, but I remember speaking at a corporate event, a medical doctors in Toronto,
Mm-hmm.
and I was at the Harbor Castle on the 27th floor. And this is like probably 15 years ago. They had this huge TV on the wall. And then 4 days later, I was at the Lethbridge Travel Lodge where the room smelled like urine and there was a sink beside the bed. So it's just like that's travel for stand up is the Travel Lodge. And then travel for corporate is like the Harbor Castle in Toronto.
Oh my gosh, that's a really
Oh,
powerful like,
yeah.
visual.
And having the sink by the bed actually wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. It was very
I
handy.
know. I was like, yeah, I mean, it's
Mhm.
functional, right? Like, that's awesome. Oh, that's such a great story. So, and then science, obviously you are a scientist and obviously you have a very science mind, but what right now, like just really lights you up, you can't read enough or get enough about in the realm of science?
I'm reading this book right now, and I've read it 3 times already. But about every 2 years, I read it, and the book is called Anxious by Joseph Ledoux, who's like a hardcore neuroscientist. So he talks
Mm-hmm.
about the bed nucleus of the striatum terminalis, the lateral nucleus of the amygdala. Like he goes into like the circuits that really fire us at these defensive survival mechanisms in our brain. Which I did a post on Instagram today that said the DSM is basically defensive survival mechanisms. So rather than calling it the book, just call it defensive survival because it's just a book of defensive survival mechanisms. That's all it is, right?
Totally.
So that's
That's so great.
I love that hardcore neuroscience. I don't talk to people about it too much but it's just the nerd in me. It really turns me on to know how the hippocampus and the superior temporal gyrus and the insula all play a role in these trauma loops, and what I can do with my own patients to go in there and kind of lobotomize those little circuits and change them around. And
Mm-hmm.
and when I see people and they've actually changed their lives, I look at them and I say, okay, this is the circuit that you used to run, and this is the circuit that you're
Oh,
running now.
I love that. It's so amazing. Thank God for
Yes.
neuroplasticity, right? I'm going to date myself a little bit, but when I was in med school, we were literally taught like the brain was hardwired after the age of like
Yep.
21, and thank God, like I think intuitively and clinically we're like, that didn't quite like land for me, but research took a bit longer and like, thank goodness, because to me, like you said, you can see that you're helping you said lobotomize, right, in the best way possible, but helping your patients like create a new circuit, a new
Yeah.
pattern, a new wiring in their brain. And that's so
And then as
amazing.
you deal a lot with spirituality. I do too, but it's in a very different kind of realm. But when I can explain to them like what happens spiritually in the brain, because I lived in India for a while, at a temple in
Mm-hmm.
India for a while, when I can explain to them the circuit that's being used through the brain, or most likely being used, it gives a lot of credibility so that it's not quite as woo woo. Like you and I haven't got into the woo. We should do another thing where we really go into
just,
the fifth
just move out.
chakra, and how the fifth chakra is all about the healing and the feeling and being able to express your feelings. And it's like
Mm-hmm.
I had a wonderful teacher in India named Kumar Ji, and he was just the most amazing guy. And I would love to tell stories about him all day. But yeah, it's just understanding. When you understand the science behind it, it doesn't seem so woo, and it just does give that like element of credibility to it, because I know when I talk to
Yeah.
doctors and psychiatrists and all that kind of thing now, and I talk to them about how anxiety is more the body than it is the mind, they look at me like I'm crazy. And I say, okay, well,
Mm.
let's look at the circuits. Let's look at the bed nucleus of the striatum terminalis. Let's look at the lateral nucleus of the amygdala. And I speak their language. And they have a very difficult
Yeah.
time discounting me when I'm speaking their scientific language.
Totally. That's amazing. I love that. And I love the right, the intersection of, we said, science and sacredness, science and mystical, science and the woo is a really, like, I don't know, just a really powerful, holistic, incredible place for healing and transformation. And I think we're getting there. Like, Western
Slowly,
medicine is like coming
slowly, but
a little
that
bit, you
dogma, it's really been an uphill slog for me, Stormy, to introduce this theory to the world, because people
know.
don't believe that anxiety is more the body than the mind. It's very, very
Mm,
difficult for people to kind of understand
mm,
that. I'm not discounting the
yeah.
mind at all, because the mind is the
Yeah.
transducer of all this stuff. But basically, unless you heal the body, my wife's a somatic trauma therapist, so I get a lot of stuff from her. But unless you focus on the body, the mind is always going to find a way to escape.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. Awesome. And then the final
Sure.
pillar, which you're already talking about, is like the woo, maybe, or I don't know, but what feels sacred? So sacredness, what feels sacred to you right now, Russell?
I think it's just finding my own center. Like
Mm,
I've been on this path for a while now. Like I said, in February of 2013, I ruptured my left Achilles tendon. And for the last 9 years, I've been working on my own anxious mind and being able to,
mhm,
write the book and trying to find ways of really, really helping people understand what's going on in their mind and their body. And just showing them that we do have this strong spiritual side that I found when I did, MDMA and ayahuasca and psilocybin and
mhm.
all these kind of things, not to get high, but just to examine, take my little neuroscience medicine brain and say, what the hell is happening in my brain when I take LSD, right? And how
Yeah,
is my
amazing.
default mode network being paralyzed? How's my ego being paralyzed by this? So it's kind of
Mhm,
like really blending the science and the spirit together. So I get high when I start seeing links between the spirit, who we are, like at our essence, and then the science
mhm.
behind it, and then being able to explain it to people. But a lot of people aren't
Amazing.
ready for it yet. So I just
No,
keep
I
hammering
know, but
away at
you're a
it.
really good translator.
Keep hammering away at it.
So I would love to have you share, how can our listeners and watchers find you, follow you, also tell us about your books, just a little info about you.
Sure. Just the Anxiety MD, not the Anxiety Doctor, but the Anxiety MD. All my stuff, my YouTube channel, my Instagram. A lot of my stuff is on Instagram. So if you want to sort of get a little snapshot of what I'm about, go to @theanxietymd on Instagram. It'll have all sorts of stuff on me as far as that kind of stuff goes. The book is called Anxiety RX. It has like an 87% 5-star rating, which you don't see
Amazing.
on anxiety books. Like you just don't see an
Amazing.
87% 5-star rating. You just don't see it. So it's a great book. It's different. It's my own journey. It's kind of like a personal journey of my own sort of
Mhm,
healing from anxiety, because I tried every type of psychiatrist, psychologist, medication, frog
mhm.
venom therapy, ayahuasca, you name it, I've tried it. And really I had to find a way of healing myself. And that's what I talk about in the book.
Mhm.
So the book is 108
Um,
chapters, because I love the book Eat, Pray, Love, which isn't a very popular thing for a guy to say, but I love that book. I love the fact that it was written in 108 chapters, and I thought I want to write a book in 108 chapters. They're small chapters,
oh,
but that's what I did. That's what I
cool.
did, and it's I really love the book. Like I'm really, really happy with how it's sold. I self-published it because I wrote a bunch of stuff in there that's very non-traditional. And I knew I wouldn't get it through a
Mm,
traditional publisher, so I published it myself. I'm really, really happy with
amazing.
how it turned out.
Well, I celebrate you for that. That is quite an accomplishment. And all of you listening and watching, definitely check out his work. It's amazing. I couldn't get enough when I came across it. So thank you, Dr. Kennedy, for joining us today, the Anxiety MD.
Thank you, Dr. Stormy. Anytime.
Awesome. And thank you to our listeners and watchers for tuning in today. And thanks for being brave and opening your hearts to love deep.